Bro, imagine your pilot just straight up collapses mid-flight, and a new captain is a teenage girl who still needs permission to stay up past 10 p.m. Like, 1 second you're ordering ginger ale, next second you're praying the girl in seat 14 doesn't hit the wrong button trying to land a Boeing. It was supposed to be just another red eye. Terminal D was buzzing with tension as Flight 493's departure kept getting pushed back. First weather, then a catering delay. Now something about a misfiled flight plan. Business travelers huffed into Bluetooth headsets. Parents herded drowsy kids like sheep through the gate. The crew looked exhausted before even stepping onto the aircraft. Among them, seated quietly in seat 3A, was Zariah Miles, 12 years old, legs dangling just above the floor, oversized headphones wrapped around her tiny head. Her skin was the color of cinnamon, her eyes a sharp, quiet storm. She clutched a handheld flight simulator. Her favorite escape since her dad, Captain Elijah Miles, had died just 3 weeks earlier. The bereavement upgrade, some pity token from the airline after her mom emailed in a frenzy, had placed her in business class. Alone, on the left side of the cabin, next to the window. Next to her, an empty seat. Beyond that, a man in a suit already snoring before takeoff. She didn't care. She liked the quiet, and she knew planes. Zariah wasn't your average kid. While others were watching TikToks, she was memorizing engine specs and V-speeds. Her dad had raised her on flight checklists instead of fairy tales. When he wasn't flying Air Force transports, he was letting her sit on his lap in old simulators, whispering things like, "Trust the instruments, fly the wings, not the fear." Now he was gone. A blood clot, mid-flight, just like that. And now she was flying alone, across the Atlantic, with nothing but his dog tags around her neck and the virtual hum of a Boeing 777 engine in her ears. In the cockpit, Captain Rick Danner adjusted his harness and leaned back. He was 54, barrel-chested with a seasoned pilot's grizzled charm, gray hair, crow's feet, coffee stains on his flight manual. The kind of man who'd seen engine fires, emergency landings, and once punched a drunk passenger mid-takeoff back in '09. He glanced sideways at the rookie flight attendant, a nervous-looking blonde in her 20s who had just handed him a steaming cup of black coffee. "Thanks," he muttered. "Hope it's strong enough, Captain." She smiled nervously. "Always is," Rick said with a half-smile, taking a long sip. "Like jet fuel with a hint of regret." The co-pilot, First Officer Devlin Reeves, was in the lavatory, taking his sweet time. Rick glanced at the controls. Autopilot engaged. Altitude steady at 30,000 feet. Clear skies ahead. He blinked. Once. Then again. A cold sweat pricked the back of his neck. Phew, that's weird. His vision blurred. His hands felt heavy. The cup dropped, clanging against the throttle. Then silence. Captain Rick Danner slumped forward, his face pressed against the yoke. The plane stayed steady. Autopilot still engaged. But the pilot wasn't flying anymore. Back in business class, turbulence rolled through the cabin like a ghost. Zariah didn't flinch. Her simulator suddenly beeped, an altitude alert. Weird. She looked up. The cabin lights flickered briefly. No one else seemed to notice. The man in 3C just shifted in his sleep. The flight attendants were busy tying carts down, bumping elbows. She glanced at her screen. The simulation warned of a descent rate anomaly. She frowned. That wasn't part of this model. She hadn't touched the settings. Her stomach flipped. Something was off. From somewhere behind her, a passenger muttered, "Is this turbulence supposed to feel like a drop?" In the cockpit, red indicators flickered silently on the main panel. A gentle ping echoed from the system. Flight path deviation detected, but there was no one to hear it. Zariah pressed pause on her simulator and looked around. Her fingers tightened on the console. Something told her this wasn't just in the game. Her eyes moved to the cockpit door up front. Locked. Closed. Normal. Still. She swallowed hard and whispered to herself, "Fly the wings, not the fear." She didn't know it yet, but she was about to fly more than a simulation. She was about to fly for real, and 187 lives were about to depend on it. First Officer Devlin Reeves zipped up his uniform pants with one hand and splashed cold water on his face with the other. Long-haul night flights always made him groggy after takeoff. He leaned into the mirror in the lavatory, gave himself a quick once-over, and grinned. "Still got it," he muttered. He stepped out, greeted by the low rumble of jet engines and the soft glow of the cabin in nighttime mode. Everything felt normal, until he reached the cockpit door, and nothing happened. He swiped his ID once. The small green light on the keypad blinked, then turned red. Devlin frowned. He swiped again. Still red. He knocked. "Rick?" No answer. He banged harder. "Captain Danner?" Nothing. Then he noticed something worse. The faintest sound through the sealed door. A low, constant alarm. He knew that tone. That wasn't normal. Devlin's training kicked in. He hit the emergency unlock sequence. Manual override, then fail-safe. Nothing. The door was completely jammed, locked, and the plane was slightly nose down. In the passenger cabin, the flight felt smooth, almost deceptively so. Too smooth. Some passengers noticed the shift. Babies fussed. Ears popped. A woman in coach rang her call button twice. A man looked out the window, noticing the stars were lower than they should be. In the galley, lead flight attendant Maria Halston was sorting cups when the red cockpit light began flashing. That meant one thing: emergency inside the flight deck. She dropped everything. "Devlin," she called down the aisle. Devlin was now pounding the door with both fists. "I think he's unconscious," he barked. "Give me the manual crowbar, now." Meanwhile, in business class, Zoraya had her simulator out again, fingers trembling. Something was off. She wasn't a pilot. Not legally. But she knew aircraft behavior. The descent rate in her simulator was matching the in-flight monitor above her seat. The nose was down. She'd seen this error code before. It wasn't a storm. It wasn't turbulence. The plane was slowly, but steadily, losing altitude. She looked around. Nobody seemed to be doing anything about it. Then came the ping. A familiar, mechanical sound that made her stomach twist. Cabin pressurization alert. Seatbelt signs relit. Flight attendants, visibly shaken, hurried down the aisles whispering orders. And that's when it started. Panic. In row 5C, a man in a silk Hawaiian shirt stood up and shouted, "Why are we descending? What's happening?" Flight attendant Maria tried to calm him, but a soft overhead chime interrupted her, the unmistakable warning tone of a cabin altitude deviation. The plane was no longer just descending. It was descending without control. From the back of the plane, another passenger screamed, "We're going down. I told y'all I knew it. Hey." Everyone turned toward the voice. It was Zoraya. She stood up in her seat, shaky but firm. Her game console clutched tightly in one hand. That alarm? That's a decent deviation. The plane's losing altitude without command input. People stared. "The pilot's not flying it," she said. "It's stuck on partial autopilot and no one's in control." A balding man 2 rows behind her scoffed. "And you know that because what? You're playing Nintendo." "It's not a game," she snapped. "It's a sim. I've logged over 500 hours. That warning pattern? It's a manual disengage loop that only triggers if the captain is unresponsive during cruise." She said it with such speed and clarity that even Maria, who had started to dismiss her, froze. Near the cockpit door, Devlin had finally pried open a service hatch beside the door, trying to override the lock from the electrical relay. It wasn't working. He slammed his fist into the panel and turned to the crew. "We need to assume the captain is incapacitated," he said. "And unless someone can fly this thing from back here, we might have someone," Maria said slowly, glancing toward the back of the plane. He followed her eyes. A 12-year-old girl, headphones around her neck, a flight simulator glowing in her palm. Back in 3A, Zoraya sat down, heart racing, hands trembling, her game now buzzing with alerts. She whispered, barely loud enough to hear, "Fly the wings, not the fear." For the first time in her life, she was going to have to fly something that wasn't a simulation. And this time, it wasn't just for fun. It was for everyone. The silence was louder than the alarms. In the galley, Maria's hands trembled as she held the cabin phone against her ear, patched through directly to ground control. Behind her, First Officer Devlin had just made the hardest call of his life. He was surrendering the plane to a 12-year-old girl. "Say again," the voice from ATC barked. "Your primary pilot is unconscious, cockpit is locked, and your backup plan is a minor." Devlin didn't blink. She knows the systems. She recognized the failure before we did. "You either help us, or this plane drops into the Atlantic." There was a pause on the line. "Then put her on." In the front cabin, Zariah's knees shook as she was ushered toward the cockpit door, now half pried open with a maintenance jack. The narrow path had become a gauntlet. Passengers stared, whispered, gasped. Some were crying. Others stared in disbelief. A few even laughed, until she walked past them without flinching. Maria leaned in. "You sure you want to do this?" "No," Zariah whispered. "But I have to." With help from 2 crew members, she crawled into the captain's seat. The cockpit was chaos. Warning lights blinking, oxygen mask dangling, Captain Danner still unconscious, slumped sideways, a faint gurgle in his throat. The smell of burnt coffee and sweat hung in the air. Zariah adjusted the seat height, but couldn't reach the rudder pedals. Her feet barely brushed them. "Okay," a calm voice crackled in her earpiece. "This is ATC. What's your name, kid?" "Zariah. Zariah Miles." The line paused. "You've got control. Say your instruments." She rattled off readings. Altitude, heading, trim, fuel tanks. Her voice cracked once, just once, but the rest came with laser precision. Years of flight sims, her dad's bedtime drills, and hours of watching cockpit footage online had prepared her for this exact moment. "Okay," ATC said after a stunned silence. "You're not kidding." "Nope," Zariah said, voice steady now. "This plane's in a nose drift. Autopilot's fading. We've got maybe 20 minutes to stabilize, or we're too low to turn." And then, the banging started. Loud, violent. From the other side of the cockpit door, a passenger was screaming. "They've hijacked the plane. She's not a pilot. That's a child in there." The former pilot turned motivational speaker, who had frozen earlier, had suddenly found his voice and was now spreading fear like wildfire. "She's gonna crash us all. They're trying to kill us." The passengers, already at a breaking point, began shouting. Some began pushing forward. The door rattled with fists. Devlin, who was guarding the entry, turned around. "Zariah, don't listen to them. Just fly." Zariah's palms were slick on the yoke. The plane was dipping into cloud cover, visibility 0, and the trim was pulling left. She wrestled with the controls, trying to correct the yaw, but the wind was picking up. "Zariah," ATC said, "we're working on rerouting nearby flights to clear airspace. But we need your heading correction, now." "I'm trimming. Just give me 10 seconds." The banging continued. A metal food tray slammed against the cockpit door. A tray cart was being rammed against it by a group of passengers. Zariah closed her eyes and remembered her dad's voice. "Trust the instruments. Fly the wings, not the fear." She adjusted pitch, balanced fuel flow, and recalibrated cabin pressure. Then, a chime on the screen. "Medical alert. Captain Danner. Blood toxicity spike detected." "What's that?" Zariah asked, staring at the alert. "Blood toxicity?" ATC was silent for a moment. "Say again." "There's a medical readout flashing red. Says the captain's blood toxicity is spiking." Devlin turned toward the captain and pried open the emergency med kit. He scanned the vitals on the secondary console. Then his face went pale. "He wasn't sick," he muttered. "He was poisoned." Zariah's eyes widened. "What?" Maria's voice came through the cabin comms, panicked. "That flight attendant, the one who served his coffee?" "Yeah, she's gone." Zariah blinked. "Gone? She's not on the plane anymore," Maria said. "She's not in the manifest. We can't find her anywhere. It's like she vanished." The cockpit lights flickered. The alarms flared again. Zariah stared at the horizon, now barely visible beyond the storm. She tightened her grip on the yoke. A 12-year-old girl, flying blind, with 187 lives in her hands, and a silent killer somewhere in the sky. The storm didn't just appear. It swallowed them. From the ground, it looked like a smear of charcoal across the night sky. But from 28,000 feet, it was a living, pulsing wall of black and gray, stretching out like an angry ocean. Zariah stared into it through the cockpit glass, her fingers trembling around the yoke. Zariah, the voice from ATC cracked through the headset. You're entering the turbulence corridor Echo 6. Begin your descent. Manual only. Repeat, you are manual only. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. Copy. She pushed forward on the control column. The plane tilted slightly. Alarms faded. Descent initiated. Then the rain hit. Not soft, not gradual. Sheets of water slammed against the windshield, blinding her instantly. Wipers engaged automatically, but barely helped. The world became a swirling blur of lights and darkness. Visibility, 0. Outside the cockpit, chaos ruled. Devlin was standing between a wall of passengers and the cockpit door. His body braced as another wave of turbulence knocked the plane sideways. He yelled into the intercom, "Remain seated. We are stabilizing." But no one listened. Some were praying. Some were vomiting. Others were screaming, fighting, pulling open overhead bins to reach God knows what. In the rear galley, Maria clutched a wall handle and tried to hold back tears. A baby wailed somewhere in the back. A man shouted in French. The flight had fully descended into something nightmarish. Zariah gritted her teeth and stared at the screen. Pitch adjustment, unstable. Airspeed climbing. Engine 1's temp, flashing amber. She was flying blind. ATC, she said, trying to stay calm. I've lost visual. Altimeter's jumping. Radar's going ghost. You need to hold steady at 7,000 feet for storm exit, the voice replied. You have to trust your instruments now. Her breathing was shallow. She looked at the horizon monitor. It was flickering. The control yoke jerked in her hands as turbulence slammed the aircraft again. Then, crack! A burst of white lightning split the sky and struck the left wing. The cockpit lit up for half a second like a flashbang. Everything shuddered. Zariah screamed, but didn't let go. Warnings exploded across the panel. Hydraulic pressure drop. Stabilizer error. Left aileron misalignment. Smoke hissed from the overhead. Sparks popped near the co-pilot's console. Zariah's heart thudded like a drum inside her ribs. Control, she cried. We've been hit. I repeat, strike on the left wing. In the cabin, the impact was felt like a jolt from a crash. Overhead bins snapped open. Screams erupted. In the middle row, a man stood, the ex-pilot, now fully drunk on airplane vodka and panic. I'm taking over, he slurred. I know what I'm doing. He stumbled to the emergency access console, one built for override communication and status mirroring. He tapped in a few outdated commands. And then, the whole aircraft tilted. Hard. Off course. Zariah, you're off heading. ATC shouted. You've deviated 40 miles west. What's happening up there? I didn't do that, she snapped, eyes darting across the instruments. And then she saw it. A secondary system override from a cabin console. Someone's using a damn backup terminal, she yelled. They're rerouting the plane from the back. Devlin heard it over the comms. He turned and tackled the ex-pilot to the ground, ripping the access tablet from his hands. You just nearly killed us all. The man sobbed into the carpet, babbling, I was just trying to help. I was just... Back in the cockpit, Zariah's focus sharpened. She recalibrated the heading manually. Hands shaking, vision blurry. Rain still pounding like hammers on steel. She reached for the engine diagnostics. Engine 2, normal. Engine 1, critical temp. Engine 1, failure imminent. Her stomach dropped, and then silence. The left engine sputtered, whined, and shut down. The plane dipped violently to the left, dragged by the dead engine. Screams echoed through the aircraft. Some passengers shouted prayers. Others fainted from panic. Maria braced herself near the galley as oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling. Zariah grabbed the yoke with both hands and pulled hard to stabilize the descent. Zariah, report. ATC demanded. Engine 1's gone, she said, her voice hoarse. Hydraulics weak. I'm losing trim control. I need altitude fast, or we're in the water in 10 minutes. She had no idea how she was still flying. No co-pilot, No visibility. One working engine. Cabin screaming. A potential saboteur still unaccounted for. But she didn't quit. She couldn't. Zariah, the voice in her ears softened. You've got this. Just breathe. She didn't answer. She just stared into the storm and flew. The control tower voice crackled again through the headset. Flight 493. You're cleared for emergency landing on runway 2L. Wind at 37 knots. Gusts unpredictable. Visibility minimal. Zariah didn't respond right away. Her small hands gripped the yoke, white-knuckled, her fingers stiff, slick with sweat. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears over the roar of the storm. Through the cockpit window, the world outside was a swirling abyss. Clouds like walls of smoke, flashes of lightning slicing through them like knives. You got this, whispered the co-pilot from the other side of the cockpit door, still sealed tight, but now patched with duct tape and prayer. His voice came through the intercom with a kind of quiet reverence. You're doing something no one trained for. Zariah didn't feel brave. She felt hollow. A 12-year-old girl wearing a too large headset and her father's Air Force patch safety pinned to her hoodie. She adjusted the flaps like ground control had told her. Her arms trembled. One engine was gone. The other sputtered now and then, coughing like it had a secret to confess. From below, the lights of the airfield were a blurry constellation of white and red. The tower had cleared the area. Emergency vehicles waited like sentinels, headlights flashing. Altitude 1,200, she muttered. Descent at 800 feet per minute, nose up 2 degrees. The wind slammed into the plane like a fist. The aircraft jolted sideways. A metallic groan shook the cabin. In the galley, a food cart crashed to the floor. Passengers screamed, then went dead silent. Everyone knew this was it. Zariah steadied the yoke again. Her cheeks were soaked. Her father used to say real courage was doing the right thing after your voice cracked. Hers had cracked 3 times already. She began the approach. The plane bucked as the landing gear deployed. The wheels fought the drag of the wind. Every alarm that could go off did. Overspeed, terrain proximity, wind shear. The cockpit felt like a disco of doom. Come on, she breathed, eyes locked on the HUD. Just hold together. Suddenly, contact. The tires slammed the tarmac with a force that knocked people from their seats. Sparks erupted beneath the fuselage. The plane skidded left, then right, nose jerking wildly. Zariah's teeth clenched. She yanked the tiller. The left wing dipped dangerously. A warning blared. The entire aircraft teetered. For a moment, it looked like they would flip, then the wheels caught grip. The plane shuddered violently. Smoke rose from the tires. The cabin lights flickered. And finally, mercifully, the aircraft screeched to a halt. Silence. Not the gentle kind. The deafening, post-chaos kind. A vacuum of breathless disbelief. The kind of silence that only happens when hundreds of people simultaneously ask the same question. Did we survive that? Then sobs. Applause. Screams. The cabin erupted in a raw, collective howl of relief. Passengers unbuckled and collapsed into each other's arms. Some prayed. Some laughed like maniacs. Others just sat there, paralyzed, weeping. Flight attendants clutched one another. One man kissed the floor. And at the heart of it all, in the cockpit, Zariah sat frozen. Her nose bled, a thin trickle running to her upper lip. Her arms hung at her sides. Her legs had stopped shaking because she couldn't feel them anymore. A flight attendant cracked open the cockpit door. Zariah? She didn't look up, just whispered, "Did I crash it?" "No," the attendant said tearfully. "You saved it." The co-pilot, now inside the cockpit again, knelt beside her. "That was the most insane thing I've ever seen, and the bravest." But Zariah didn't speak. Her mind had shut down. She was somewhere else now, maybe in her bedroom, back in Miami, with her dad sitting at the foot of the bed, talking about engine thrust and crosswind landings like it was bedtime poetry. The patch on her hoodie, the one her dad wore on his final flight, had torn halfway loose. She gripped it now like a lifeline. Outside, emergency crews ran toward the fuselage. The runway lit up with flashing red and blue. But inside, 187 people were alive. Because a 12-year-old girl, grieving, scared, and half their size, had pulled off the impossible. Flashing lights bathed the tarmac in a chaotic red-blue pulse as investigators, paramedics, and federal agents flooded the scene. The wheels of the charred 737 still smoked faintly under the morning sky. Inside the cockpit, investigators handled the black box recorder like sacred relics. Within hours, they confirmed what every passenger already knew. A 12-year-old girl had flown the plane, alone, through a storm, with one engine dead. News vans lined up outside the airport's perimeter fence like vultures. Inside the hangar where survivors were being debriefed, Zariah sat on a folding chair, staring blankly into a styrofoam cup of apple juice she hadn't touched. Her cheeks were smudged with soot. Her lips were cracked. The blood from her nose hadn't dried cleanly. Her hands still trembled, but her eyes were dry. A female paramedic crouched in front of her. "You're safe now, sweetheart. It's over." But it wasn't. Not by a long shot. Across the tarmac, airline executives in starched suits huddled in whispers. The head of legal, a man with thin lips and thick-rimmed glasses, clutched a document already prepped with talking points. His phone buzzed nonstop. "Find a flight attendant," he barked into his AirPods. "We need to control the narrative. No talk of poisoning. This is a technical malfunction. Got it?" The black coffee that took out the captain? Gone from the record. The vanishing flight attendant who served it? No manifest entry, they said. The autopilot failure, backup override console, the ex-pilot's drunken interference? All irrelevant, they claimed. Instead, they spun it into a feel-good PR campaign. The miracle girl who saved Flight 329. Her face was plastered across morning shows in 6 countries. Animated renderings recreated the descent as dramatic music swelled underneath. One reporter even asked if Zariah would consider a career in aviation. What they didn't report, that the airline offered her family $25,000 and a free flight voucher. As if trauma had a dollar value. As if nearly dying, then saving 187 strangers, could be compensated with a coupon. When Zariah's mother, a nurse in Paris, arrived, she broke down upon seeing her daughter. She'd had no idea what had happened until a coworker showed her a breaking news alert. Zariah whispered when they reunited, "I just wanted to get to you." The scene made headlines again. A single mother and her daughter, caught in the airline industry's machinery. But not everyone swallowed the sanitized version. One man watched the coverage from a dusty office filled with case files and grief. His name was Damon Reese, a civil attorney whose brother had died in a commercial crash 4 years earlier. One also blamed on technical error. When Damon saw Zariah's calm voice on the live footage, describing the storm vectors and rudder response time, he put down his coffee. And when he saw the airline's apology scroll across the bottom of the screen like an afterthought, "We regret the incident and are working to ensure this never happens again," he snapped his pen in half. By the end of that day, Damon was on a flight to London. He arrived unshaven, sleep-deprived, and furious. But when he walked into the family's temporary hotel room, he spoke softly. "My name is Damon," he said, "and I lost my brother on a plane like that. I'm not here for money. I'm here for justice. If you'll let me, I'll fight this. All the way." Zariah looked up at him, not like a child, like someone who had seen death blink. She nodded once. So Damon filed suit. Gross negligence. Corporate cover-up. Child endangerment. The media got the documents. The pressure mounted. And the airline? They panicked. What began as a miracle story was spiraling into a legal and moral war that could bankrupt them. Zariah had landed a plane. Now, she was about to crash an empire. The airline thought the storm had passed. They had the headlines, the PR spin, the heartwarming image of a brave little girl in a captain's hat. But the real turbulence was just beginning. 3 weeks after the crash, a leaked audio file hit the internet like a lightning strike. A distorted voice, nervous, breathless, spoke over static. It wasn't an accident. The captain wasn't supposed to land that plane. He was going to expose them. Journalists scrambled. Blogs erupted. By morning, major outlets were running stories with headlines like, Pilot poisoned to cover corporate embezzlement. Insider claims sabotage behind Flight 329 disaster. The story broke open like a cracked fuselage. An anonymous whistleblower, a former maintenance supervisor named Luis Ortega, stepped forward. He'd been fired 6 months earlier for misconduct, but now he had receipts. Emails, financial ledgers, surveillance footage from the hangar. Luis wasn't just some disgruntled ex-employee. He was a silent witness to a multi-million-dollar embezzlement ring buried deep in the airline's senior executive ranks. The pilot of Flight 329, Captain Daniel Reeve, had been collecting evidence. Quietly, carefully, for nearly a year. He discovered that fuel invoices were being doctored. Parts listed as replaced were never touched. Safety inspections? Forged. Executives were rerouting funds through fake vendors. Luxury condos in Dubai, private yachts in Spain. Reeve was supposed to hand everything over to the aviation board the day after that flight. But someone found out, and someone wanted him silenced. The poisoned coffee, originally dismissed as a bad batch, was now a smoking gun. Arrests followed like dominoes. The airline's CFO was dragged from his lakeside mansion in handcuffs. The head of procurement, arrested at a golf tournament in Scotland. Even a vice president of international operations was caught boarding a private jet out of Qatar. Each one denied everything, until the documents surfaced. The bank transfers, the burner phones, the fake identities. Meanwhile, Damon Reese, the relentless attorney, held daily press conferences with Zoraya's mother at his side. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. The truth had its own voice now. And Zoraya? She kept quiet. She hated the cameras. She went back to sketching in her journal, flying paper planes in the courtyard of the recovery center. But there was a new confidence in her shoulders, a quiet strength. She was no longer just the miracle girl. She was a survivor, a symbol. As the lawsuits piled up, the airline stock plummeted. Shareholders screamed. Their international partnerships collapsed. Passengers canceled in droves. They were hemorrhaging trust and money. With no way out, the board called an emergency meeting. The new interim CEO, a soft-spoken former pilot named Margaret Chen, offered a desperate olive branch. She sat across from Damon Reese, eyes hollow, voice shaking. "We'll settle. Full responsibility. We want to survive this." Reese didn't flinch. This isn't about survival. It's about accountability. That night, they signed the papers. $10 million. In cash. No NDAs. No silence clauses. No more spin. The announcement sent shockwaves across the industry. Zoraya's name trended again, but this time, not as a child pilot. She was now the face of change. In Paris, her mother sat beside her at the kitchen table, holding the check in disbelief. "What do we even do with this?" she whispered. Zoraya thought for a long time. Then she slid her sketch pad forward. On the page was a drawing, a small flight school, her name on the hangar, and kids in the cockpit. "We help others fly," she said. And for the first time since the crash, her mother smiled, wide and unafraid. The headlines begged for her. Girl hero of Flight 329 signs major deal. Zoraya Reese, from cockpit to red carpet. Miracle pilot turns down millions. Why? They all wanted a piece of her. Every network, every talk show, every glossy magazine. One brand offered her a fragrance line. Another wanted to make her the face of limitless potential. A streaming platform pitched a teen drama loosely inspired by her life, with a script already written. Zoraya said no to all of it, not with bitterness, not with arrogance, just a quiet shake of the head. "I already had my moment," she told one persistent agent. It wasn't about being famous. It was about not dying. She stopped doing press altogether. In the quiet that followed, something unexpected happened. People respected her more. Instead of fading, she grew into a myth. She went back to school, took her exams, walked the halls like a normal kid. Though classmates sometimes paused when they saw her, unsure if they should ask for a photo or just let her be. She still visited the rehab center every Tuesday. Same time, same hoodie, same quiet smile. But behind the scenes, Zoraya was working on something. Late at night, While the world tweeted and speculated about her next move, she sat on the floor of her bedroom with old notebooks, her dad's logbooks, and pages of sketches she'd been drawing for years. One day, she brought a worn leather binder into her lawyer's office. Inside were charts, mission statement, a proposal. "I want to start a foundation," she said, "in my dad's name, for girls who dream of flying, but who can't afford the sky." She called it the Sky in Her Eyes Foundation, because that's what her dad used to say about her when she was little. "She's got the sky in her eyes," he'd laugh, pointing at her as she stared out the window during a storm. Not afraid of clouds. She lives in them. With a chunk of the settlement money and a few silent donors, the foundation launched quietly but powerfully. The first class of girls, 6 of them, all under 18, received full scholarships to aviation academies across the country. Flight suits were fitted, engines roared to life, and on launch day, Zariah didn't give a speech. She just stood in the hangar, watching as the girls took off into the sunset, her dad's old flight jacket draped over her shoulders. A quiet tear rolled down her cheek, one she wiped away quickly, like her dad would have. Months later, a friend convinced her to visit a high-tech flight simulator downtown. It was just for fun, she said. No pressure. Zariah walked in, eyes scanning the dials and switches with practiced calm. She slid into the seat, buckled up, hands steady on the yoke. It was like slipping into an old song. On screen, a digital runway flickered to life. Wind speed, altitude, the rumble of artificial engines. Behind her, the instructor stood watching. A grizzled man with coffee breath and a weather ball cap. He leaned in through the cracked door and smirked. "You ever flown the real thing before?" he asked. Zariah didn't turn. She just smiled. That sly, knowing, "don't mess with me" smile. "Once," she said. "Kinda nailed it." The simulator roared forward. Through the windshield, the clouds broke open. Light streamed in, and for just a moment, as the fake plane lifted off, it didn't feel like a simulation at all. It felt like destiny.